Listen closely, because this is not the kind of story you find in books or on the evening news. This is the kind of truth that hides in the folds of a nation's shadow, a truth you were never meant to hear, deep in the Appalachian mountains where the fog moves like a living thing and the trees seem older than time itself. There is a place called Odd, a name that sounds harmless until you stand on its soil and feel the weight of the silence pressing against your skin. Here in this forgotten corner of West Virginia stands a crumbling shack where a family lives in a way that defies both nature and society. The Whittakers, whispered about by locals, feared by outsiders, and known to the internet as the most infamous inbred family in America. But the story is far darker than the clickbait headlines. This is not just about poverty or isolation or some strange anomaly to gawk at from a safe distance. This is about how cycles are forged in blood and how the human mind can be reshaped by generations of confinement. Picture a dirt road that twists like a serpent through the hills until it reaches a clearing. In the center, the house leans as if it has been trying to escape its own foundation for decades. Its walls sag under the weight of years of neglect. Its windows clouded as if they too refuse to see the world beyond. Step closer and you will hear the barking of dogs, dozens of them. Their voices sharp against the heavy air. Inside you find faces that carry the unmistakable marks of a tangled bloodline. Eyes that seem both present and far away. Bodies shaped by genetic fate rather than choice. They do not speak to you in the way you expect. Some communicate only in grunts or sudden movements. Others simply watch as though they have seen strangers come and go too many times to care. You feel a shiver not because of what you see, but because of what it means. This is not random. This is the product of history. Of decisions made under the crushing grip of isolation, where survival meant marrying within the only circle available. And as you stand there, you begin to understand this is just the first layer of a much deeper descent. To understand the Whittakers, you must first understand the land that shaped them, because Appalachia is no ordinary place. It is a realm where the mountains are not just stone and soil, but silent watchers, holding centuries of secrets in their slopes. The air here carries more than the scent of pine and coal dust. It carries the weight of isolation, a kind that bends the mind and reshapes the soul. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, this region was a prison without walls. Roads were little more than trails carved by mule hooves, the nearest town a day's journey away, and winters came like an uninvited king that took what it pleased. Families lived off the land, not because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. And when you are surrounded by only a handful of neighbors, the lines of family and marriage blur until they vanish entirely. In Odd West Virginia, that reality was more than a possibility. It was inevitable. The Whittaker bloodline began its inward spiral when two brothers, Henry and John, stood at the roots of what would become a tangled tree. Their children, cousins by birth, began marrying each other, not out of desire to break the rules, but because there were no other options. Over time, the branches of the tree curled back on themselves, looping in tighter and tighter knots. By the time modern eyes would gaze upon them, the Whittakers were living proof of what happens when the gene pool becomes a stagnant pond. And yet you must understand, this is not just a biological story, it is a psychological one. Generations raised in the same valley, without fresh blood, without new ideas, without the world beyond those hills to challenge them. Isolation does not just limit your body, it limits your mind. It teaches you that what is close is safe and what is far is dangerous. So the same blood that ran in your veins became the blood of your children, because to marry outside would mean stepping into an unknown world. That fear was greater than the fear of nature itself, and so a pattern became a legacy carved into bone, into thought, into the very way these people saw themselves. What began as survival became destiny, and that destiny is still visible in every line of the Whittaker face today. When you look at the Whittakers from the outside, it is tempting to see only the surface. A strange family in a crumbling house, their lives marked by physical and mental scars of inbreeding. But the truth runs deeper and darker, because this is also a story about power, about systems that thrive when people are trapped in cycles they cannot break. Appalachia has long been a forgotten battlefield, not of armies, but of influence and control. The coal companies came here not just to take the black rock from beneath the mountains, but to take the lives of the people who worked those mines, binding them to company towns, where every home, every store, and every meal belonged to the same hands that signed their paychecks. Debt was not an accident, it was the design. When the only store is owned by your boss and your wages are given in company script, you cannot leave, you cannot save. You cannot imagine a life beyond the mine. And while the Whittakers themselves may not have all worked in the mines, they lived in the shadow of this control. Isolation was enforced not just by geography, but by economic chains. When schools are underfunded, when health care is miles away, when the only road out is a dirt path that disappears in the rain, your world becomes smaller until it fits inside the boundaries someone else has drawn for you, and that small world becomes your prison. This is why the Whittaker story is not simply about a family making strange choices in a vacuum. It is about generations being cornered by poverty, by neglect, by a system that benefits when the poor stay poor and the isolated stay isolated. The same forces that let coal companies strip the mountains bare without restoring the land are the forces that looked away as entire families slipped into genetic collapse. To those in power, families like the Whittakers were invisible until they became a curiosity, something to point at when the cameras came. Around, but never something to save. The tragedy is not just in the bloodline. It is in the fact that no one stepped in. No one bridged the gap. No one brought them into a wider world where options existed. This is the kind of darkness that hides in plain sight. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it because you realize the Whittakers are not an isolated phenomenon. They are a symptom of a much larger sickness. By now, you may think you have seen the full shape of the Whittaker story, but you have not even touched its deepest vein, because beneath the surface lies something almost ritualistic, a kind of inherited script that each generation follows without ever being told the words. Isolation breeds patterns, and those patterns are passed down like heirlooms, invisible yet unbreakable. In the Whittaker family, the home itself becomes a cage. Not because the doors are locked, but because the mind is the lock, and the land is the key that has been thrown away. Children grow up watching the same faces, hearing the same voices, breathing the same air, heavy with the weight of history. They learn from their elders without needing lessons that the outside is not for them, that strangers mean danger, that change is a threat. This is how control works in its purest form. It does not need chains or guards. It needs belief. Belief that you belong exactly where you are and nowhere else. Over decades, this belief becomes identity, the way a river carves stone, slowly shaping it into something unrecognizable from its original form. And once that identity is set, even freedom can feel like death. You must understand this is not unique to the Whittakers. This is a mechanism used throughout history by kings, by empires, by corporations. Keep the people in a closed loop, and they will police themselves. The tragedy is that the loop in odd West Virginia is not made of laws or soldiers, but of blood itself. A closed circuit of life that recycles the same traits, the same limitations over and over, until they become fate. When outsiders come with cameras, they see a family to document, perhaps to exploit. But they do not see the structure holding it all in place. a structure built not just by the geography of Appalachia, but by centuries of human instinct to cling to the familiar, even when it destroys you. This is the real horror, not the genet. Consequences, not the poverty, not the strange behaviors, but the realization that once a mind accepts the loop, it will fight to protect it just as fiercely as it might fight for its own survival. And in the quiet corners of the Whittaker home, you can feel that truth humming like a low electric current, something you cannot hear, but you can sense in your bones. The visits never come without a reason. People like to believe they arrive in odd West Virginia out of curiosity or compassion. But curiosity can be a knife, and compassion can be a mask. Outsiders have always been drawn to the Whittakers, the same way moths are drawn to a flame, and in that attraction there is danger, because a moth never survives the fire. Some arrive with cameras and promises saying they want to tell the family's story to the world. Yet, the lens is never neutral. It decides what to show and what to hide. It chooses the angles that make the audience lean in and the ones that make them turn away. Every shot is a decision, every cut a kind of surgery. Others arrive without cameras but with a different hunger. A hunger for the strange, for the unsettling, for proof that such lives still exist in the cracks of modern America. They come as collectors of experience, leaving with a story to tell at dinner tables far from here, while the Whittakers are left unchanged in the dust. But there is another layer, one rarely spoken aloud, because to say it is to admit it exists. Some of these visits are not about telling the story, but about controlling it. The more a narrative is shaped, the easier it is to own. And once you own a story, you own the way people think about it. The Whittakers have become a symbol. But symbols are dangerous. They can be turned into tools. When an image of poverty and isolation is broadcast, it tells the public a certain message, and often that message serves those already in power. It says this is what happens when you live wrong. This is what happens when you don't join the system. Yet the irony is the Whittakers are the product of that very system, the neglect, the economic abandonment, the engineered isolation, all designed and reinforced over generations. When the cameras leave, the reality remains a quiet house, surrounded by silent hills and faces that will not be seen again. Until the next outsider decides to return, you must understand that to step into the Whittaker home is to step into a living archive of control, a place where every wall, every object, every silence is part of a larger design, one that does not end with this family, but echoes far beyond them into places you may not expect, into systems you may already be part of, without knowing it. If you think the Whittakers exist only in odd West Virginia, you are mistaken. They are not an isolated case, but a reflection, a small mirror showing a much larger face, one that stretches across history and geography. The mechanism you see here has been used by kingdoms, empires, and corporations for centuries. The formula is simple. Take a population, cut them off from the outside world, remove their resources, and replace truth with repetition. Soon they will not just accept their prison, they will defend it. In medieval Europe, remote villages became breeding grounds for superstition and control. The church or the local lord could dictate every part of life from marriage to harvest, because no one knew anything beyond the borders of their fields. In colonial territories, foreign powers used isolation to erase languages, destroy culture, and make people dependent on the very systems that conquered them. What you see in the Whittakers is that same formula condensed into a single family line. And because it is so concentrated, the results are undeniable. But here is the part that is almost too heavy to bear. This pattern does not only survive in history books, it is alive now in ways you may not recognize. Apartment blocks where poverty locks people in place. Rural towns abandoned by industry neighborhoods where every exit leads back to the same streets. These are modern loops hidden in plain sight. Information control has evolved from whispers in a village square to algorithms on a glowing screen. Yet the goal is the same: keep the loop closed. You might think you are nothing like the Whittakers, but ask yourself how many of your beliefs were given to you, not by choice but by repetition. How many of your fears are inherited, not from your own life, but from the stories told to you as truth? The Whittakers are not just a cautionary tale about genetics, they are a warning about what happens when a closed system is left untouched long enough that it becomes invisible to those living inside it. And perhaps the most unsettling thought is this: you may already be inside such a loop. Right now, the only difference is that your walls are not mountains and dirt roads. They are made of ideas, and you cannot break them until you see them for what they are. So now we return to that small house in odd West Virginia, where the walls lean and the air feels heavy with something you cannot name. The Whittakers move through their rooms with the quiet rhythm of people who have never been in a hurry because there is nowhere to go. They are not acting, they are not performing, they are simply being. And that being is the very thing that unsettles you. You realize that all the pity, all the shock, all the fascination you might feel is just a thin layer covering a deeper reaction. The recognition of something uncomfortably familiar. The loop that holds them is a smaller reflection of the loops that hold you. The truth is not that the Whittakers are trapped in the past. The truth is that they are living proof of what the present is capable of producing when neglect and control are allowed to run their full course. The roads around their home twist like veins through the mountains, leading nowhere you have not already been, and in that geography there is symbolism, the reminder that most escapes are illusions, unless you are willing to leave behind not just the land, but the identity it has carved into you. History will remember the Whittakers as an oddity, a viral curiosity, a name passed around in hushed tones or sensational headlines. But history is never that simple, because behind every strange family, every forgotten town, there is a chain of events, decisions, and silences that made it so. If you stare at this family long enough, you stop seeing them as separate from you and start seeing them as a version of what you could become if the loop was never broken. That is the final weight of their story, not the strangeness, not the inbreeding, not the poverty, but the question it plants in your mind. What is my loop, and who built it? You can ignore that question, you can scroll past, you can turn off the video, but once it has been asked, it will wait for you in the quiet moments when the noise of life fades, and maybe one day you will find the courage to step outside whatever invisible walls hold you. But if you don't remember this, the loop does not need your permission to keep turning.